He captured an Apache woman with his trap. She feared he would harm her, but instead, the sun had just begun its slow rise over the rugged hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A soft breeze moved through the tall grasses, carrying the earthy smell of the forest and the faint, distant sound of a river rushing over rocks. In this quiet morning, the land seemed peaceful, yet the wilderness always held its secrets. Among those secrets, few knew the woods better than Thomas McAllister, a rancher who had spent decades living along the edge of the forest. Every tree, every rock, every animal track was familiar to him. He knew which berries were safe to eat, which paths could lead to trouble, and which traps would protect his livestock from wolves and coyotes. Thomas was careful, steady, and observant, the kind of man who never rushed but never hesitated when the moment demanded action. That morning, as Thomas checked the traps he had set the previous night along the edges of his property, he noticed something unusual. One of his snares, meant to catch a fox, had been triggered, but the struggling inside was not the size of a fox. He crouched down, gripping his walking stick, and peered carefully through the brush. His eyes widened slightly in surprise. It was a young Apache woman caught in the trap. She had dark, long hair tangled with twigs, her clothing dusty and marked with scratches from the forest undergrowth. Her brown eyes were wide with fear, and she tried to pull free, but the trap held her firmly. The woman froze as she saw Thomas stepping closer. Her mind raced. She had grown up hearing stories of settlers who could be cruel, men who would harm anyone who came near their land. Every instinct screamed at her to struggle harder, to scream, or to prepare herself for a fight. She tightened her grip on a small knife at her belt, though it was of little use against the strong metal of the trap. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, and she forced herself to stay still as Thomas knelt a few feet away, studying the trap carefully. Thomas could see the fear in her eyes, the tension in her body. He spoke gently, his voice calm and even. "Easy there. You're not hurt too badly, are you?" His words were careful, meant to soothe, not alarm. The woman's eyes narrowed. She didn't speak. She didn't trust him yet, and she didn't want to give him any reason to think she was helpless. Her hands twisted and pulled at the trap, but it did not budge. Thomas worked quietly, his movements precise. He understood that rushing might frighten her even more. He set his walking stick aside and examined the snare mechanism. With patient hands, he released the tension, loosening the trap just enough for her to pull her leg free. The moment she stepped out, she stumbled slightly, her legs trembling from the fear and effort. Thomas extended a hand to help steady her, but she instinctively stepped back, holding her knife at the ready, still unsure of his intentions. "I'm not going to hurt you," Thomas said, noticing her hesitation. "This trap is for animals, not people. You must have walked into it by accident." His tone was firm but kind. She studied him carefully. The calmness in his eyes, the lack of aggression in his stance, made her pause. Her mind screamed caution, yet a tiny part of her began to wonder if he was telling the truth. The woman took a tentative step backward, scanning the forest behind her. Why didn't you leave me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You could have just let me suffer." Thomas shook his head. "That's not who I am." "No one deserves that." His words were simple, but there was a weight to them that seemed to reach her. The woman's hands relaxed slightly around her knife. She still didn't trust him fully, but she realized he had not tried to harm her the moment he saw her caught. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them. Birds perched silently in the trees, and the river in the distance flowed without sound, as if it too was waiting. Thomas gestured toward a nearby clearing. "There's water and a place to sit over there. You should rest for a moment." She hesitated but nodded slightly. She followed him, keeping a careful distance. Every step she took, her mind went over what had happened. She thought about her people, about the stories of strangers who had crossed paths with them in violent ways. And yet here was a man who had freed her without hesitation, who had offered her help instead of harm. It was confusing, unsettling even, but there was a thread of relief she couldn't ignore. Thomas led her to the small clearing near the edge of the river. The grass was soft, and the sunlight warmed the stones scattered along the bank. He motioned toward the water. "Drink some," he said, and she saw the kindness in his eyes. She knelt cautiously, cupping her hands and bringing water to her lips. The cool water soothed her dry throat and helped steady her nerves. After a moment, she looked up at him again. "Why do you live out here in the forest all alone?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost curious. Thomas smiled faintly. "I grew up here." This land, it's part of me. I know it, I respect it. I take care of it, and it takes care of me in return. He paused and studied her. And you, what brings you into these woods? She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I come here to gather plants, sometimes to hunt small animals, she admitted. The forest has been part of my life too. It provides if you know it well. Thomas nodded slowly. Then you understand why I set traps, yes. To protect what belongs here. His tone was gentle, not a rebuke. She understood that, and it eased some of her tension. She realized that though their worlds were different, there was a shared understanding of survival, of respect for the land. For a few moments they sat in silence. The only sounds were the wind through the trees and the soft rushing of the river. The woman's fear began to subside, replaced by cautious curiosity. She noticed the care in Thomas' movements, the steady patience in his eyes. She saw that he was not just a man of the land, but also a man of principles. Suddenly, a rustle in the underbrush made her flinch. Thomas immediately moved between her and the sound, his posture protective. A small fox darted out from behind a bush, pausing to look at them before bounding away into the forest. The woman let out a nervous laugh, realizing her heart had raced over nothing. Thomas chuckled softly too, and the tension between them eased a little more. Hours passed as the sun climbed higher. Thomas offered her some simple food he carried, a piece of bread and some dried meat. She accepted it reluctantly at first, then gratefully, understanding that he truly meant no harm. They talked quietly, learning each other's names and sharing small details about their lives. The woman, whose name was Naeli, discovered that Thomas was not the man she had feared. His honesty, calmness, and respect for her boundaries slowly chipped away at the wall of fear she had built. By late afternoon, the woman realized she had to return to her people. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and sadness. Thomas offered to guide her partway through the forest to ensure she reached a safer path. She accepted, though she remained vigilant, watching his every move. They walked together, side by side, moving through familiar trails that twisted between trees and rocks. Thomas pointed out safe passages, places to find water, and signs of animals nearby. Naeli listened intently, realizing that despite their differences, he understood the land in a way she could respect. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of red and purple, they reached the edge of a clearing where Naeli's people often traveled. She turned to Thomas, her expression unreadable at first, then softened. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Thomas nodded. "Be safe. The forest can be kind, but it can also be dangerous. Respect it, and it will guide you well." Naeli took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun and the cool breeze on her face. She watched him for a moment, committing the sight to memory. The calm, steady figure who had been a stranger only hours ago, but had become a symbol of unexpected kindness. With a final nod, she disappeared into the trees, returning to her people, carrying with her a story of trust found where fear had once ruled. Thomas stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the forest reclaim its quiet. He thought about the brief encounter, about the bravery in her eyes and the tension he had seen in every movement. He felt a strange connection to her story, a reminder that even in a world often defined by fear and mistrust, kindness and understanding could still flourish. As darkness settled over the forest, the animals began their evening songs. The wind whispered through the trees, and the river shimmered under the fading light. Thomas returned to his ranch, checking his traps one last time, but his mind lingered on the woman he had freed, on the courage it took to face fear, and on the quiet lesson that sometimes trust begins with a single act of kindness. The forest seemed quieter the next morning. The sun had not yet fully risen, and a soft mist clung to the trees and grasses, giving everything a delicate, dreamlike glow. Thomas McAllister was already awake, moving carefully along the edge of his ranch. His traps had been checked yesterday, but he liked to make sure everything was secure. The encounter with Naeli, the Apache woman, lingered in his mind. He could not forget her eyes, so wide with fear, yet so strong and determined. That moment had stayed with him, reminding him of how fragile trust could be, and how quickly a single act could change someone's perception. Meanwhile, Naeli returned to her people, her mind still racing from the encounter. She had expected hostility, maybe even violence, yet Thomas had shown her nothing but patience and care. It was confusing. She had grown up hearing stories about settlers, how they were often cruel, careless, or dismissive of her people. Yet here was a man who had freed her from a trap, offered food and water, and guided her through the forest. It was difficult to reconcile the image of him with the stories she had always been told. Naomi knew she could not yet trust him fully, but a small seed of curiosity had been planted. For several days after that morning, Naomi avoided the area near Thomas' ranch. She kept to the forest paths that led away from the edges of the land, cautious not to appear where he might see her. But she found herself thinking of him often. She remembered how calm he had been, how he had spoken to her without condescension, how he had respected her space even when she was trapped. Slowly, the fear that had gripped her on that first encounter began to fade, replaced by cautious curiosity. Thomas, on the other hand, could not forget the encounter either. He checked his traps more carefully, but his thoughts kept returning to Naomi. She had moved through the forest with skill and confidence, yet she had been caught in his trap. He admired her resilience, her bravery, and the careful way she had observed him, trying to determine whether he could be trusted. He realized he wanted to meet her again, not out of mere curiosity, but because he respected her courage and intelligence. It was a quiet morning when their paths crossed again. Naomi had ventured near the river to gather herbs that only grew close to the water. Thomas, checking the traps near the same area, noticed her moving through the trees. She froze when she saw him, immediately taking a step back. Her instincts told her to hide, to flee, but she did not. Instead, she watched him carefully, noting his calm demeanor. Thomas raised his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "Good morning," he said softly. "I didn't mean to startle you." Naomi kept her distance but relaxed slightly. "I remember you," she said cautiously. "You freed me from your trap." Thomas nodded. "Yes, I remember you too. Are you all right?" "I am," she replied, her voice steady but still wary. She studied him carefully, noticing the way he stood, relaxed but alert, as if he was always ready to act if necessary. There was a strength in him, but it was not the kind that threatened her. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The forest around them seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Then Thomas spoke again. "I thought I might see you here," he said. "I hope you don't mind me being here." "I don't mind," Naomi replied, though she kept a careful watch. "I come here often." "The forest, it is important to me," Thomas nodded. "I understand. I spend most of my days here too. It teaches you a lot about patience, about respect, about survival." He paused, then gestured toward the river. "Would you like to sit for a moment?" "The water is calm this morning." Naomi hesitated. She had never sat and spoken with a stranger for this long, especially one she had only just met under such tense circumstances. But there was something in Thomas' voice, a calmness that invited trust. She stepped closer, keeping a safe distance, and lowered herself onto a flat stone near the water. Thomas sat nearby, careful not to invade her space. They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the gentle rush of the river and the soft rustle of the wind in the trees. Naomi watched Thomas quietly, noticing the way he observed the forest, the traps, and even her. It was clear he was attentive, not just to his surroundings, but to people as well. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you help me that day? Most men would not have cared." Thomas looked at her, thoughtful. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one deserves to be hurt unnecessarily, not you, not anyone." Naomi considered his words carefully. They were simple, but there was honesty in them. She realized that he was not speaking out of obligation or pity. He genuinely believed in doing what was right. As they continued to talk, the conversation became easier. They shared small stories about the forest, the animals, and the plants. Thomas spoke about the traps he set, why they were necessary, and how he used them to protect the land and his livestock. Naomi explained how she used the forest for her people, gathering food, herbs, and materials for daily life. They discovered a shared respect for the land, a bond that began to form not from friendship, but from mutual understanding. A sudden movement in the trees made Naomi tense. She instinctively moved closer to Thomas, who immediately positioned himself between her and the sound. A deer had stepped out from the underbrush, its eyes wide with caution. Naomi exhaled slowly, and Thomas gave a small, reassuring smile. "See," he said softly, "not every rustle is danger." The moment passed, but it left an impression on Naomi. She realized that with Thomas, she could feel safer, even in the unpredictable forest. He respected her abilities, but he also offered protection when needed, without trying to control her. Over the next several days, their meetings became more frequent. Naomi no longer avoided the edges of Thomas. land entirely, and Thomas often left small gifts of food or water near the paths he knew she used. They did not speak every day, but the familiarity grew, and so did a sense of trust. Naomi began to see that Thomas was a man of his word, a man who respected boundaries, and a man who valued honesty. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly dark clouds covering the sky and strong winds shaking the trees. Naomi was caught away from her usual paths and struggled to find shelter. Thomas noticed the storm and set out quickly, following the tracks he had learned to recognize. He found her huddled under a large tree, wet and shivering, her supplies soaked. "Come on," Thomas said, extending his hand. "We'll find better shelter." Naomi hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. Together they moved through the forest, Thomas guiding her with steady confidence. They found a small cave-like overhang that offered protection from the rain. Thomas quickly laid down some dry leaves and helped Naomi get comfortable. They waited out the storm in silence, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the rocks and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Naomi watched Thomas quietly, noticing the calm way he handled the situation. He was not flustered by the storm, nor did he make her feel helpless. She realized that trust was growing between them slowly but surely with each small act of care. When the storm finally passed, the forest glistened with fresh rain and the air smelled clean and sweet. Naomi felt a sense of relief and gratitude. She realized that she had underestimated Thomas, that her fears from the first encounter had begun to fade. He had proven himself through actions, not just words, and she could no longer deny the respect and trust she felt for him. As they walked back toward the familiar paths, Naomi began to speak more freely, asking Thomas about his life, his experiences, and his connection to the land. He answered with patience, sharing stories from his past, moments of struggle and triumph, and lessons he had learned from living close to nature. Naomi listened carefully, realizing that there was much to admire in his character. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, Naomi felt a quiet sense of connection. She knew she would still be cautious, as any wise person should be, but she also knew that Thomas had shown her the possibility of kindness, respect, and understanding even in unexpected places. Before parting ways, Thomas said softly, "You are welcome here anytime, Naomi. The forest is big and there is room for both of us to move safely." Naomi nodded, feeling the warmth of those words. "Thank you, Thomas. I will remember that." As she disappeared back into the forest, Thomas watched her go, thinking of how unusual it was to form a bond with someone so quickly, yet so deeply. He knew their story was only beginning, that trust needed time to grow, and that the forest had already begun to weave their paths together in ways neither of them could fully understand yet. That day marked the start of something new, not just for Thomas and Naomi individually, but for the fragile connection that was slowly forming between two people from very different worlds. A connection built on respect, understanding, and the courage to face fear with patience and kindness. The days that followed were warmer and brighter. The sun shone through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds sang loudly and the river sparkled in the morning light. For Thomas McAllister, the mornings were often spent checking his traps, repairing fences, and tending to his small plot of crops near the edge of the forest. But recently his mind had often wandered to Naomi. He found himself wondering what she was doing, if she had safely returned to her people, and how she felt about the forest now after their encounters. Naomi, for her part, was also thinking of Thomas more than she expected. She moved through the forest with confidence, but she remembered the calmness in his eyes, the care he showed when she was trapped, and the gentle guidance during the storm. It was unusual, she thought, to feel this way about someone she barely knew. There was still caution, yes, but also curiosity, and a quiet respect that grew stronger each day. She found herself watching for him on her walks through the trees, aware of his presence even when he wasn't there. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, Naomi was searching for a rare herb that only grew near the riverbank. Its leaves were delicate, and its roots had healing properties for minor injuries. As she knelt to examine the plants, she heard a soft voice behind her. "You're looking for something specific?" Thomas asked, stepping carefully so as not to startle her. Naomi froze for a moment but then turned. "Yes, I need this herb. It helps with cuts and scrapes," she said cautiously, keeping her distance. She noticed he had brought along a small basket, likely to carry supplies or gathered plants. Thomas nodded. I can help. I know where a few grow closer to the rocks near the river. They are easier to reach there. His tone was calm and friendly, inviting trust. For a moment, Naeli hesitated. She could go alone, but the thought of guidance from someone who knew the forest so well seemed safer, especially with the sun starting to dip lower. Slowly, she nodded. Show me, she said, and together they walked along the riverbank, careful not to disturb the undergrowth. As they moved, Thomas pointed out the tracks of animals, explaining which belonged to deer, rabbits, or coyotes. Naeli listened intently, fascinated by his knowledge. She realized that he not only survived in the forest, but he truly understood it in a way that few could. She began to relax, allowing herself to enjoy the walk and the quiet companionship. When they reached the area near the rocks, Naeli spotted the herbs immediately. She knelt to gather them carefully, and Thomas crouched nearby, selecting some for himself. As they worked, the conversation grew easier, flowing naturally. Naeli found herself asking questions about Thomas, life, his childhood, and how he had come to live in the forest. Thomas spoke with patience, sharing stories of his youth, of the lessons the land had taught him, and the value of observing and respecting nature. Naeli listened with interest, occasionally sharing her own experiences and knowledge of the forest. It was clear they were beginning to understand each other not just as individuals, but as people who shared a connection to the land. Suddenly, a rustling from the bushes caught Naeli's attention. Her hand instinctively went to the small knife at her belt, though she did not draw it. Thomas immediately stood in front of her, his stance protective. A moment later, a young fox emerged, looking curiously at them before darting back into the trees. Naeli exhaled slowly, her heartbeat beginning to calm, and she looked at Thomas with a small smile. You're very alert, Thomas said quietly. Good instincts, that could save you in dangerous situations. Naeli nodded. I have to be. The forest can be unpredictable. You never know what might appear. Thomas glanced at her, impressed by her calmness and awareness. You are very skilled, he said. I can see why you move so well here. You respect the forest. The sun began to sink lower, casting long shadows over the river. Thomas noticed that Naeli's supplies were almost full, and he suggested they return toward safer paths before nightfall. As they walked back, they continued to share stories, laughter, and small observations about the forest. Each moment of shared knowledge, each act of patience, slowly deepened the trust between them. Over the next several weeks, their meetings became more frequent. Naeli began to leave small gifts of herbs or berries along the paths she traveled, knowing that Thomas would notice them. He, in turn, would leave water, food, or helpful items for her. They did not speak about it directly, but both understood that these small gestures were a form of communication and trust. It was as if the forest itself had created a path that drew them together, bridging the gap between caution and curiosity, between fear and respect. One day, as they were walking along a narrow trail near the river, Naeli slipped on a wet stone and fell, twisting her ankle painfully. She cried out softly, trying to rise, but the pain made it impossible. Thomas immediately knelt beside her, examining the injury carefully. Hold still, he said gently. We'll make this easier. Using his knowledge of first aid, Thomas carefully wrapped her ankle with a clean cloth, making sure it was secure but not too tight. Naeli winced but remained still, trusting him completely. He then helped her stand, supporting her weight as they slowly moved toward a safer, flatter area. Thank you, Naeli said quietly once she could walk more comfortably with his help. I would have been in trouble without you. Thomas shook his head. We take care of each other here. That's how trust grows. You help me understand more about the forest, and I hope I can do the same for you. Naeli looked at him thoughtfully. She realized that she no longer feared him. Instead, she felt a sense of safety, respect, and even friendship. There was a bond forming, delicate but strong, built on actions rather than words. As they continued their walks, they began to explore further into the forest together. Thomas showed her hidden paths, secret clearings, and safe spots near the river where the herbs grew most abundantly. Naeli shared her knowledge too, teaching Thomas about the plants, the small animals, and the signs of weather changes. Their shared skills and knowledge made them appreciate each other even more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned soft shades of pink and purple, they reached a small clearing. Naeli sat down, tired from the day's walk, and Thomas sat nearby. The moment was quiet and peaceful, filled with the soft sounds of the forest settling for the night. "I never thought a stranger could be so trustworthy," Nayeli said softly, almost to herself. Thomas looked at her and smiled faintly. "Trust comes slowly," he said. "But it can grow stronger than fear if both people choose it." Nayeli nodded. She realized how much her perspective had changed since the first day she had been caught in his trap. Fear had ruled her mind then, making her wary of every movement he made. Now she understood that his actions had shown her kindness, patience, and respect. Those actions mattered more than any words or warnings. Over the following days, a pattern developed. They would meet in the morning or afternoon, explore the forest, gather herbs, and share stories. Sometimes they would sit quietly, listening to the river or watching the birds. The silence was never uncomfortable. Instead, it became a form of communication, a way to understand each other without words. Nayeli learned to trust his judgment, while Thomas learned to appreciate her courage, insight, and independence. One day, as they rested near the riverbank, Nayeli noticed the tracks of a wolf nearby. She froze for a moment, recognizing the danger. Thomas immediately stood, scanning the area carefully. "It's far enough away for now," he said quietly, "but we should move carefully." He guided her along a safe path, pointing out signs of the wolf's movement and explaining how to avoid danger. Nayeli followed his lead, grateful for his knowledge and calm presence. The encounter reminded her of how important it was to trust those who had proven themselves, and how quickly danger could be avoided with patience and understanding. By the end of Part 3, Nayeli and Thomas had built a strong foundation of trust and mutual respect. They had faced small dangers, shared knowledge, and learned to rely on each other. What began as fear had slowly transformed into cautious friendship, with the possibility of something deeper. Both knew that the forest had brought them together, and both were aware that their bond was fragile but growing stronger each day. They parted that evening with a quiet understanding. Nayeli returned to her people, and Thomas returned to his ranch, both carrying a sense of connection and hope. The forest was no longer just a place of survival or danger. It had become a place where trust, respect, and understanding could flourish, even between two people from different worlds. The forest was alive with the sounds of morning as the sun crept above the horizon. Birds chirped softly, and the wind rustled the leaves in a gentle rhythm. Thomas McAllister moved along the familiar paths near his ranch, checking traps and surveying the land, but his thoughts were far from the usual routines. They lingered on Nayeli, the Apache woman who had become more than just a fleeting presence in the forest. Each day their paths crossed, their understanding deepened, and Thomas felt a quiet sense of connection he had not experienced before. Nayeli, meanwhile, had returned safely to her people. Yet, the memory of Thomas remained vivid in her mind. His calmness, his patience, and the respect he had shown her created a warmth that contrasted sharply with the fear she had felt the first day. She had spent much of her time since then reflecting on what had happened, considering how rare it was to meet someone who could combine strength with kindness. Slowly, she realized that what she felt was no longer mere relief or curiosity. It was trust. One morning, Nayeli decided to visit the forest again. She carried with her a small basket of herbs and roots she had collected for Thomas, a silent gesture of gratitude. As she moved through the trees, she noticed the familiar trail and the soft sunlight filtering through the branches. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with anticipation. She knew Thomas would be nearby, tending to his land, and the thought of seeing him again filled her with a strange, comforting excitement. Thomas was indeed near the river, examining a trap he had set to protect the livestock. When he noticed her approaching, he paused, a small smile forming on his face. "Good morning, Nayeli," he called softly, careful not to startle her. She nodded, returning the greeting, and held up the basket. "I brought some herbs for you," she said quietly. Her voice carried both caution and sincerity. Thomas accepted the basket with gratitude, examining the contents with care. "Thank you," he said. "These will be very useful." He paused, then added with a gentle smile, "You did not have to, but I appreciate it." For a moment they stood quietly, the river flowing nearby and the forest alive with morning sounds. There was a sense of peace between them, a comfort that had grown over time. Nayeli realized how much she had come to rely on these small moments, the shared walks, and the quiet companionship. Thomas felt the same, aware of how unusual it was to form such a bond with someone whose world was so different from his own. As the day progressed, they decided to walk further into the forest, exploring areas they had not visited together before. Thomas pointed out a grove of trees with thick, twisted roots where mushrooms and medicinal plants grew abundantly. Naomi knelt to gather some of the plants, and Thomas assisted, careful not to crowd her space. Their conversation was light, filled with stories of the forest, observations about animals, and occasional laughter at small discoveries. By afternoon, they reached a small clearing where the sunlight fell directly on the soft grass. It was a perfect place to rest, and they both settled down, letting the warmth of the sun dry their clothing and soothe their tired muscles. Naomi leaned back against a tree, watching Thomas as he arranged some of the plants they had gathered. "You have taught me a lot about the forest," Naomi said softly. "I never realized how much there is to notice, how much we can learn from just observing." Thomas looked up and smiled. "And you have taught me to appreciate things I might have overlooked," he replied. "Your knowledge, your awareness, it has reminded me that there is always more to learn and that sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected sources." Naomi considered his words. It was rare to meet someone who valued her knowledge and respected her perspective. She felt a deep sense of appreciation for him, not just for his guidance, but for the way he saw her as an equal rather than someone to protect entirely. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the distant howl of a wolf. Naomi tensed, but Thomas remained calm, assessing the direction and distance. "It's not close," he said quietly. "We should move carefully, but there is no immediate danger." He guided her through a safe path, pointing out signs of wildlife and teaching her how to interpret the subtle hints in the environment. Naomi followed closely, grateful for his presence and his calm approach. She realized that trust was not just about feeling safe. It was about knowing someone had the knowledge and judgment to act wisely when danger appeared. As the sun began to set, they reached the edge of a hill overlooking a wide valley. The sky was painted in hues of pink, orange, and purple, and the river below glimmered like a ribbon of silver. They stood side by side, silently taking in the view. Naomi felt a sense of awe at the beauty of the landscape and a quiet gratitude for the companionship they had shared. Thomas spoke softly, breaking the silence. "This forest, it has a way of showing us what is important," he said. "It teaches patience, respect, and understanding, and sometimes it brings people together in ways we do not expect." Naomi turned to him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. I never thought I could trust someone like you," she admitted. "But you have shown me that trust is possible even when we are afraid." Thomas nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Trust is earned, not given lightly," he said. "You have earned mine as well, Naomi. Your courage and knowledge have shown me that strength comes in many forms." For a long moment, they stood together, the wind rustling through the trees and the valley below bathed in the last light of the day. Naomi felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Thomas, but to the forest and to the lessons they had shared. She realized that this bond was rare, built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experiences. As darkness approached, they began the walk back toward the familiar paths. Thomas carried a small lantern, casting a warm light on the ground, while Naomi followed, careful but confident. The forest was no longer a place of fear for either of them. It had become a place of learning, trust, and quiet friendship. Before they parted for the night, Thomas spoke once more. "You are always welcome here, Naomi," he said gently. "The forest is big enough for both of us, and there is room to share it safely." Naomi nodded, feeling the sincerity in his words. "Thank you, Thomas. I will remember that." She paused, then added, "You have changed the way I see this forest and even the way I see people. That is something I will carry with me." They exchanged a quiet nod, and Naomi disappeared into the trees, returning to her people. Thomas watched her go, reflecting on the journey they had shared. What had started as fear and caution had grown into trust, understanding, and respect. The forest had been a silent witness to their story, shaping it with each shared moment and each lesson learned. In the following days, they continued their meetings, each encounter strengthening the bond between them. Small gestures, shared knowledge, and careful guidance deepened the trust they had built. They learned to rely on each other without words, understanding intentions through actions and respect. Each day brought new discoveries, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. One afternoon, as they worked together near the river collecting medicinal herbs, a sudden rainstorm approached. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Nayeli looked up, concern flickering across her face. Thomas immediately recognized the danger and guided her toward a sheltered area beneath a large rock overhang. They waited out the storm, the rain drumming softly on the leaves above. Nayeli shivered slightly, and Thomas offered her a dry piece of cloth to keep warm. They huddled close enough for warmth, but maintained the comfortable distance that had always marked their interactions. In that quiet moment, Nayeli realized how much she trusted him, not just for protection, but because of the respect he had always shown. When the storm passed, the forest glistened with fresh rain, and the air smelled clean and sweet. They walked back slowly, enjoying the renewed beauty of the forest. Nayeli felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had found a rare kind of companionship, one built on trust, respect, and understanding. Eventually, the time came for Nayeli to return fully to her people. She knew she would continue to meet Thomas in the forest when possible, but she also knew that their bond could survive even when apart. As she reached the edge of the trees where her people's paths began, she turned to Thomas. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything. You have taught me that even in a world full of fear, trust and kindness are possible." Thomas smiled, feeling the weight of her words. "And you have taught me that courage and wisdom come in many forms. Remember that, Nayeli. The forest and life itself are better when we trust each other." With a final nod, Nayeli stepped into the path leading to her people, carrying with her not just herbs and supplies, but a story of unexpected trust, kindness, and understanding. Thomas watched her disappear into the distance, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The forest had brought them together, shown them lessons, and created a bond that would endure even when the paths of their lives diverged. That evening, as Thomas returned to his ranch, he reflected on the journey. He had learned that trust could be fragile but powerful, that respect could cross boundaries, and that even small acts of kindness could change someone's world. The forest was no longer just a place of survival. It was a teacher, a bridge, and a witness to the human heart. Nayeli, meanwhile, returned to her people with a renewed sense of hope and understanding. She knew that her encounter with Thomas had changed her forever. It had shown her that even in unexpected circumstances, respect, patience, and courage could create connections that lasted a lifetime. And in the quiet moments, when she thought of the forest and the man who had guided her through it, she felt a warmth that reminded her that trust, once earned, was a treasure beyond measure.